G'day, welcome to Playtonics, the RPG podcast where we design sessions, not games. My name's Rocky.
And I'm Jords. Every month we deconstruct some genre fiction and then figure out what anchors it in that world and how we could turn that into an RPG session.
We pull apart an iconic property or genre, a show or a book, to see how it works, see what makes it tick, and then figure out how to reassemble those vibes at the game table. And I'm super stoked for this month's topic because it is maybe a controversial take here in the internet. Maybe one of my favorite things ever made, and something that I have wanted to do as an RPG for a very long time. What are we talking about this month?
This
Jordan?
month, we're going to deconstruct Firefly. At
yeah.
tender age of 22, it's probably time that these two white guys sat down and pulled apart why they love it so much, what vibes it gives that are just not present in other media, and then figure out how we can turn that into a gameable thing.
Yeah, it's so many things. It's a Western, it's a heist, it's an amazing character comedy. It's got it all. It's got guns, it's got horses, it's also got spaceships. It's like there's so much. And that's just the title sequence that I'm describing. It's got Nathan Fillion in a really, really attractive pair of suspenders. And some other cast members as well. But I only have eyes for him. Let's be real.
Mate, there are a few members of that cast I don't have eyes for. You know the meme that's like, oh, my sexual orientation is the cast of The Mummy?
Yeah.
Equally applicable to Firefly.
Absolutely true. So let's dive straight into it. You sit down to play a game of Firefly. What are you disappointed if you don't get? What are the vibes that underpin this show? What are the pillars that hold it up? What are the third metaphor for holding this show together?
A metaphor as adequately adhesive as glue, or the metaphor that
it
could
was
be
glue,
like
wasn't
that.
it? What are the glues? What are the various adhesives that make this Firefly stick to the Firefly paper?
Oh, that's awful. I hate that. that is such a shit analogy. I'm going to throw some thoughts and let's see where they land. First vibe, straight off the bat, there's got to be a ship. And you've got to go through the blackness of space.
Absolutely. There has got to be a ship. It is a cliche, I think, in Firefly circles to be like, oh, but the ship is just as much a character as any of the characters on the show.
And they're right.
They're right. It's a cliche for a reason. We love a cliche that's correct on this show. That's basically the show, is we collect all the correct cliches and then we put them in a pile and run them as a game.
Legitimately, yeah.
Yeah, I think there's got to be a ship. There's got to be a cool ship. The ship's got to be slightly janky. The ship can't, work very well. Yep. It certainly can't have a full tank of gas, which I'll get to in a second.
Always held together by the goodwill and intentions of the people on it. Like
some kind of
the only
adhesive
thing that's really holding it against the vacuum of space. And every job is just to keep it flying that little bit longer. There's no getting rich in this. This ship is not a vessel to wealth.
It is not. And I think that's a really good segue into, to borrow from another very ship-centric piece of media, what the ship really represents, what the Black Pearl, the Firefly represents, is freedom.
Absolutely.
So that's kind of, you've got to physically have a ship, but you've also got to have, I think, that sense of we're all in the ship because we want some kind of sort of self-determination that we can't get in normal society. And in that sense, I think it, both the show and an RPG that you run out of the show ties into some real like wish fulfillment fantasies about, running away and just traveling and going from place to place and being a bit of a transient, which
you're either running away from something or you're running towards something, and that something that you're running towards might be nothing. Like it's just the notion that you're not tied down.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I think you've got to have a ship, but you've also got to have the sense of freedom that the ship represents, and that's a much harder one to nail down, vibes wise, than just giving the players a ship, because you can just give the players a ship. But I think how you nail that vibe of freedom to do as you please, or go where you want, or be unencumbered or unstrictured by society, like nailing that vibe is the harder of the two things to do.
I think it has to tie back to motivations of why the characters are on this ship. So when the players are coming to the table and they're building someone to live in this world, it can't be, I'm doing this as like a classic Dungeons and Dragons-y thing. I do this to get rich. I'm going on adventures to make big money. It's got to be, I'm going on these adventures so that I can sustain the ship, which gives me the lifestyle.
Yeah. We need a ship. We need some freedom. What else do we need?
We need some characters to experience that freedom, and they all have to have their own personal drives. And I think it's super important that they all have similarly, but not entirely aligned goals or drives.
Yeah.
There has to be room for a little bit of tension.
Yeah. Unpack that for me a bit with some examples from the show.
Okay.
Because I think one of the really cool things about the show is how much or how well we get to know all of these characters. And so, yeah, I think that the characters are a really big part of it, and they're all like super different. But you're right, there is something that they all kind of have in common, and it's this, I don't know, I guess desire to be on the ship. This all seems very circular, right? It's like there's a ship and the characters want to be on the ship because the ship is where the characters want to be. So like,
we've solved it. Pack this episode up.
No, break me out of the loop, Jords.
All right, let's cut
what
it to
does
this
it mean to want to be on the ship?
So, most iconic character of Firefly would be Mal Reynolds.
Mal is the like archetype, I think, and everyone else's characters is kind of like, you start with Mal and then everyone's kind of a variant on.
Mal is the ultimate substrate for this crew, right? He is intensely loyal and above all else desires not to be tied down, because the world that he lives in now is the one that he lost to in the war, right? And the only thing he wants is to thumb his nose at the Alliance, the hegemony that's kind of taken over this world and kind of ruled him out of that independent vibe. So his desire to keep the ship running is real easy.
It's like purely ideological. And, well, not purely ideological. It's like ideological and also like a fair bit of spite.
Oh, he is so fueled by spite, and that's like some of the best comedy is his spitefulness.
Yeah.
And how petty it can be sometimes.
Okay, so Mal is like the purest, I guess, expression of this you can't take the sky from me aesthetic or drive.
And once you step onto his ship, he will protect you fiercely. Any slight against you is a slight against him. Like he's very patriarchal in that way, in a like real father figure.
Not so much once you step onto his ship, but once you're part of his crew, which I think is the really big difference, right? Like the pilot sort of takes us through the process of Simon and co just being passengers, just being on the ship, to being part of the crew. And being accepted as part of the crew is like not a thing that is done lightly.
Oh yeah, it's not a trivial thing at all. Like you earn your place in there, and like your foothold might just be that he recognizes in you that same longing.
Yeah,
like,
and no one's...
You need to run, or you have somewhere that you're going to and you're not sure where, this is where you're going to.
Yeah, and it is exactly what Kaylee says when she's like picking up passengers, right? It's like, you're going to come with us because you're not looking at the destinations, you're looking at the ships. And so the people who end up on the ship and on the crew, I think more importantly, they're people who do actually have a common desire for whatever it is that Serenity represents. So yeah, I think, it's good shit. So I think the reason it's kind of worth digging through those a little bit is that, like, yeah, there's a ship, but I think there's also a crew. So they're not just a group of characters. They are a crew who work together. So they have these like very disparate reasons for being there. And we could dig into that level of detail for like anybody on the ship or anybody on the crew. But at the end of the day, what they all want is to keep on flying. I mean, it's what makes them a crew, right? Rather than just like some people on a ship. So I think that sense of crewness, that sense of like shared purpose, shared something, like
shared je ne sais what.
I don't know what.
I don't know quoi.
But like that sense of crewiness is like, I think that is a really key vibe to capture. And it's something that is actually quite difficult to do a lot of the time in traditional RPGs, is to make the players feel like they're a team, that they're all kind of pulling in the same direction, that they all want to be there. I think we get quite bogged down in character backstories and what makes our characters different, and we don't focus enough on what makes them the same or what brings them together. And that is a thing. I don't remember
where I learned this, but it resonated with me really strongly. Now when I start a game, I don't let my players build characters away from the table. We don't build characters anymore. We build parties.
Exactly. And I think you have to approach, skipping ahead a little bit, but I think you would approach this the same way. They certainly did when they were writing the show. They didn't write characters. They wrote a crew with a common reason to be there and interesting like points of difference that can come up in play, which I think is maybe also worth talking about, because I think there is still enough difference in there to create some like really good scenes.
There is tension that people could leave.
Yeah.
Like there's the gravitational pull to stay, but multiple times it comes up where there's just like character differences that drive internal plot that we love. Yeah, it's especially true in the context of like River and Simon, right? Because River and Simon are the ones who are explicitly running away from something.
And there is so much threatening to like throw them out the airlock at the next stop or turn them over to the authorities for the ransom. Like, it's just this thing that keeps coming up during the show is like, we don't think Mal would actually turn them over, but like Jane might, you know? That's this constant source of like really interesting inter-character drama. It's a constant source of like plot hooks and plot points that just keeps throwing up interesting situations, which I think is the real boon for the show writers, and also the real boon for you as a GM.
And us as viewers for those 10 to 14 episodes.
RIP.
So absolutely you need a crew, and that crew needs to be tied together. And we've got this constant tension that underlies some of the like choices of where do we go, what jobs do we take, that conflicts with my personal desire, but it aligns with like the overall ship's thing. It gives these really nice character-driven moments. And I don't think you can replicate that in a single session, which, you know, I know is often our take is how would we put this together into a session? And we've broken that rule before, like with Avatar, which also has that like internal tension between the party members. I think this is the same. I think you got to run this for a proper arc.
I think so too.
Really get them to flare up and come out and play.
Yeah, I think that it's worth taking a second to actually talk about the structure of the show, because everyone likes to say that it's a space western, but I think
sometimes it is.
Well, yeah, sometimes it is, but like the set dressing is all space western. I will grant that. It looks and feels very westerny. The plots, I think, stick much more closely to the kind of stuff we talked about in the cyberpunk episode, right? The plots, bar very few, are mostly heists, jobs of some kind.
Heists or smuggles. Those are the two things they do in a transport, and the cargo doesn't matter, or they're stealing some shit. And often the exact nature of that thing doesn't matter either. They're stealing a MacGuffin.
Yeah. So yeah, you've got like it's heist plots in a Western setting, but then there's this third element which is like, and I don't know what to call it except Avatar: The Last Airbender, right? Like that's because that's the episode that we discussed it in, but it's like the third element is like almost like kids cartoon, right? Like it's that ensemble show where it's so clearly from this like earlier era of TV. It like just snuck in before streaming and time shifting and like all of this stuff where things kind of develop, but not a lot. And people are still expected to be able to pick up on any random sort of given episode and understand what's happening. Which is yeah, it's a thing you see in kids' cartoons. It's a thing you see in the Simpsons. We have a small set of characters who we know really well. I mean, it's a big cast for a show, but it's like a small set of characters. And there's also a really constrained sort of set of world elements, I guess. We get a few interesting recurring characters who pop up again and again. There's like...
Which is genuinely impressive considering they only had 14 episodes.
Oh, I think it's like one of the things that this show does best is like we get Nishka and then we get Nishka again, like the consequences of the relationship with Nishka, and we get Yosef Bridge and then we get Yosef Bridge showing up again. We get Badger and then Badger like shows up. Does Badger show up twice or three times? We get Badger in the train job and then Badger
at least twice
in Shindig.
And he's in the very first episode. He's in the pilot as well. So yeah,
maybe
times.
We don't get him in Train Job, but we get Badger a couple of times, and each time these characters show up, it's like, it's that person from before, but like something slightly different about them. The relationship has changed. Sometimes it's antagonistic. Sometimes they're like allies, and I'm including like things that aren't characters in there as well, because the Alliance is kind of just like monolithic, and the Blue Sun dudes are just sort of creepy.
The Reavers.
Yeah, the Reavers, again, kind of just monolithic, kind of just sort of...
reintroduced entities.
Yeah. But there's... Yeah, you have a very small set of characters and then a very small set of, like, lore external to the characters, and almost nothing that isn't, those elements of the universe actually shows up. Like, we don't know much about the universe that doesn't show up and get used in the show.
We know that there are core worlds.
Yep.
And there are not core worlds.
Outer Rim, I think they call it.
Yep.
Blatantly stealing from Star Wars.
So it's like you're either in the place with all of the riches and the haves, or you're with the have-nots who are super frontier. And very often they're just popping along to a new planet. Often we don't even know the name of it.
Yeah, some tiny moon.
Yep, that's it. That's all we need to go on.
Right, and you get to that planet and it's like, okay, well, there's probably a local authority. There's a sheriff of some kind. There's probably a local outlaw element. And the crew rocks up and they're aligned with one or the other, which immediately creates tension. And sometimes, you get a recurring character show up, like a Yosef Bridge. The Alliance rocks up and like makes a mess. But it is like... I genuinely think that's just about it, right? It's like it's this tiny, very detailed and textured and lovingly rendered, but it's like it's actually a very small set of things that the show is playing with, and it's just throwing us a different combination of those things every episode.
Yeah, I think as a gameable element, this is an ideal setting. Like, there's
absolutely.
so little chance that you're going to tread on some lore and upset someone. the whole thing is just a toolkit to assemble your frontier town that you're going to do the job on, or spin up the location where you're going to do the heist on the core worlds or something like that. Like, there's so much space left for you.
Yeah.
The dots are there and you get to connect them every time.
Yeah, where a lot of the time, like, I would feel maybe a little about adding a planet to a Star Wars game, right? Because there's so much Star Wars lore. Or even sometimes, adding bits to a game set in the Forgotten Realms, right? Like, it's like, oh, that's going to contradict another source book some way. But like, I know there's an official map of the system in Firefly, but I would have no problem at all adding a planet or a moon to that. And I don't think even the biggest sort of show superfans are going to argue with you if you pop up another insignificant moon or change what's on one of the moons that exists, because yes, the show didn't run for very long, and so that backstory never had time to develop, and so a lot of this is like, yeah, it was clearly a blank slate that they were going to build on in future seasons. But I think a lot of it is also intentionally written that way. It's not a zoomed out show. It's not a space opera. It's a zoomed in show. The only bits of the world that we see are the bits that happen to be like on the microscope slide next to our main characters and their shit. I was going to say,
this is like, the show is built around rendering the world where the characters are.
Yeah, and we know it exists, right? I'm sure there's a writer's bible. A lot of this detail has been written down, and if you go and get like the official Firefly RPG books, it's like a lot of this detail is in there, but like, it doesn't matter, right? Like, what matters is what's in front of the characters. That's kind of how the show runs, and I think that's how a game would run as well.
Totally agree. So, like, quick recap. We got a ship. We got a crew. The crew has bonds to each other and individual drives as well. We've got kind of a setting where there's frontier worlds, there's core worlds, there's a ship that travels through the darkness of space. Space is scary as well.
Nothing good happens in space.
No. Like, at any stage, you could bump into an Alliance patrol, or the Reavers, or some booby trap left out to lure you in. Like, any encounter in space is not good.
Yep.
Yeah, let me rephrase that. Every encounter in space is bad.
Yeah.
And then we've got, like, heist elements or smuggling elements. We've got classic crime. Genuine, classic,
exciting new crime.
Salt of the earth crime. And that's dressed up in, like, Western clothes in a literal and metaphorical sense.
Yeah. Sometimes Western clothes, sometimes, and I think this is one of the like interesting parts of the show, sometimes it does edge into like actual cyberpunk clothes. I'm thinking specifically of when they do the hospital heist on Ariel. Like, anything that's on those central planets is, you almost have permission to go a little into the Blade Runner-y, like, or less Blade Runner, more like Coruscant-y from Star Wars, like, yes, it's City World. So it can get very urban, but I don't think that's where you're spending most of your time.
Yeah, like you got to spend most of your time out on the rim,
out in the sticks,
and then
that's where they can't get you, Jords.
Yeah, that's where
the Alliance can't get you.
Take me out to the black.
How do you think we're looking for pillars?
There's one last thing that I want to squeeze in there.
You got another one?
And that's etiquette, I think, is a pillar. We touch on, like, what civilization is.
I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
And there are, like, layers of etiquette in each of these societies, where it's like, how do you conduct yourself in the rough and tumble tavern of the frontier town versus the upper echelons of, like, when you're actually in the core worlds or interacting with the Alliance. Like, there are these different layers of social structure.
Yeah, I don't know if etiquette is the word you're looking for. I think the word you're looking for is class.
Yeah, it's very much that, yeah. But, like, each of them has nuanced rules of how you can walk through that layer of society without drawing attention to it. And the characters in the ship belong to different layers of that. So some of them can, like, Jane can seamlessly walk through the tavern and he belongs there. It's his world.
Right, but Inara is going to turn heads if
Yep.
she walks into a street tavern.
And like even Mal's like awkward man between worlds when he's at the ball where, he makes a faux pas, he punches the guy, and now he's suddenly trapped in like a social structure that demands he duel the other guy.
Yeah. It's one of the things that drives sort of the tension between the crew, and it's one of the things that drives the tension between the crew and the rest of the world, is where they are and aren't allowed to be or supposed to be. That's very insightful. I like that. That's not a point that I had on my dot points, but like I like that one a lot.
Rarely occurs, but sometimes I have thoughts.
So, if we recap a little bit, we know that we show up to this game, we want to have a ship. We absolutely want to have a crew, and a crew is not just people who happen to be on the ship. The crew is like people who all want to be there with a common purpose, but I think crucially only just. So they're only just holding together. They got some tensions pulling them apart as well.
Yep.
So you have that like freedom, self-determination vibe that sort of absolutely has to be in there. We have recurring characters or recurring places, but like a very small set of them, and that's what allows them to recur so neatly, is because we're actually only playing with a very small box of toys. We're basically pulling jobs.
Yep.
The plots are basically heists, and we're...
Can be really episodic in the way that we put them together.
Yep. We're really just pulling heists to keep the ship flying, because flying the ship is all we want to do. And then we've got some interesting elements of like social class in there as well, which I think, quite neatly maps onto the sort of core worlds, outer worlds dichotomy as well. We've got some very interesting tensions between haves and have-nots on various dimensions. If I'm going to generalize that one out, there's like core world haves, but there's also like outer rim haves, and then there's core world have-nots and outer rim have-nots. It's like a very interesting...
I was going to say, this one maps real nicely to your two axes of like
Love some
high
axes.
society, low society, core world, rim world.
Yeah. And who can and can't go into each of those spaces is like a real interesting plot driver. Have we missed anything?
I don't think so. If I sat down and I wanted to play a Firefly game, I think those are the things that could easily draw me in.
You got to be on the ship. You got to be part of the crew. You got to see recurring places and relationships and characters. You got to do some jobs, and you had some interesting social tensions playing out in the background, and some interesting character tensions playing out in the background. I would be pretty satisfied. All right.
So
time
to prep a session.
Let's prep a session.
How do we
what
make
do
this
we do?
actionable?
What do we do to operationalize these vibes?
Right.
Give me some concretified, some concreted, some... Make the vibes hard, Jords. Make them hard.
Is cemented what you're going for?
Sure.
All right. We've just sat down. We're going to build the crew. So
I think we're going to build the crew. I think we also should build the ship together.
Oh, absolutely, 100%.
At the very
ship
very
is a
least,
member of the crew, Rockwell.
That's
we
true.
know that.
At the very, very least, if you're just doing a one-shot type thing and you don't want to like design the whole ship together, at the very least you have to name the ship.
Oh yeah, there's got to be buy-in from everyone for that.
So yeah, we start with the ship and the crew, and we make sure that we have a ship that we're all kind of attached to and that we all want to be on. And then we start to build a crew who all have reasons that they want to keep flying and keep the ship flying and keep the rest of the crew flying with them.
So we build a ship together, and then you bring your character to the table with their like one bullet point backstory.
Yep.
Drawn from the fabric of the world. So it's like Mal Reynolds is, I was a sergeant who was at the Battle of Serenity Valley. That's his whole backstory.
And I think...
And then you have like a series of prompts, questions to tie you to the other characters. And the rest of your backstory comes from touch points that other people offer you, maybe.
I like that. I think I would add to that one question that is basically, why do you need the ship to keep flying? You know, Mal needs the ship to keep flying so he can still feel like he's got some self-determination, you know.
Yeah,
Simon
maybe we
needs the
change
ship
that
to
one
keep
bullet
flying.
point to the answer to this question.
Yeah,
The
I
answer
think
to
that's
this question is your one bullet point. Yep.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing that binds the crew together in the show, is that they do the job, they get paid, they keep flying.
Yeah, you could really easily reskin this and run a different genre of game in the same universe with all the same elements. But if you want it to be a Firefly game, I think this is core.
Again, even if it's just a one shot, you can start the session off by like answering that very quickly and get everyone very quickly on the same page, and very quickly find some tensions between the characters as well, even just based off the answers to that question.
So we've got that.
We've got a ship. We've got a crew.
We have some prompts though. I can't remember which game does this, but it's like a bunch of girls having like a sleepover kind of a vibe. And when you make your characters, you don't get to choose what your features are. Your features are in comparison to everyone else. So if two people say that they're jealous of my looks, I have prettiness +2. And I feel like you could do something quite similar here, where it's like, list something that you admired about another crew member. And then list something that you were at odds with them about. And you kind of build your web. Like you build really quite a complexified web of relationships all at the table together.
Yeah. And I like that because even if you have 6 players at the table, they still only need to keep track of 2 relationships. Right? It's like, I like this person, I don't like this, but like, you know, there's one alliance and one rivalry.
Yep. 1 plus, 1 minus.
And they're going to start to seek out scenes with those, especially if you tie it to like a mechanical benefit of some kind. They're going to start to seek out scenes with those players so that they can play through that. I really like that. So definitely some kind of collaborative character creation process to build our crew. And
So
then if you wanted to get real funny with it, like
we want to get real funny with a Rocky.
like I've forgotten the name of the game again. I forgot the name of this exact game in a previous episode. It's the one where you draw the map. Quiet Year.
Oh, Quiet Year. Yeah.
Yeah. So like imagine the Quiet Year, but instead of drawing a map of your town, you're drawing out the rooms and parts of your ship and like what is there and what history each part of like.
Oh yeah. Maybe it's you're claiming your quarters in the ship and like you bring the outline of a Firefly class ship.
Yeah. And
then you guys are assigning bits to it.
What's here? Like what's something that happened once in the engine room that you remember? Like who had a fight in the kitchen?
I do love the like you choose a room and the prompt is something in here is broken and haphazardly fixed.
Why?
Who stumbled into it and why?
Yeah, I like that. There's an odd decoration on the flight deck. Like who put it there and what is it? You know, and in the show it's Wash's dinosaurs, right? Like it's how you end up with all those like funny little bits of texture, and then that pre-populates your ship when you're doing scenes on the ship. It pre-populates the ship with things that the players know are there, and they can pick them up and play with them again.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a toy for that to be reintroduced. It's a reintroducible element to a scene.
Yeah, we love that. That's
how interesting. All right, okay. So now we've got a crew, we've got a ship, and the ship is tied to the crew, and the crew are tied to each other in the ship.
Yep.
We got a nice web going on here.
We love it.
Now we choose the job.
I think that's the next step, right? Every episode, every session is a job. We're not doing long, amorphous, like
it's not a
smeared out
quest.
Campaigns here. It's like every episode, every week, we do a job, we get paid, we keep flying.
So I feel like to like you can choose your job from the ones we discussed before. Like it's a heist, it's a smuggle, or it could be something like I want to say like an exfiltrate, which is just a heist by a different name, but like you're trying to get someone out of a place, like the Prison Break kind of a vibe, you know?
War stories, right? It's like getting the guys out of Nishka's station is like, that's an exfiltrate.
Oh, perfect example. It does happen in there. Yes, that's exactly what you want, right? And once you've chosen that, now you get to go back to your like table of world building things and put together, okay, who's giving them this job and where on that like core world, rim world, high society, low society do they sit? And then where does the job take place? Choose another one, and then let's make some characters to fit those vibes.
And ideally recycle some characters who already like, we're looking for every chance we can to bring characters back, because again, that's one of the things that the show does so well, and we want to grab that and bring it in. I think that's a good structure. Like you choose a shape for your adventure, you choose some elements. It's like, who are we stealing from? Who's the good guy? Who's the bad guy? Who's the client? Who's the mark? Who's going to show up halfway through and fuck shit up?
I was going to say, and then you do it again and you add the complication.
Yeah.
Like the personification of complication.
That's a very Yosaf Bridge thing to do, is show up halfway through and make a mess. And I think having someone who will show up halfway through and make a mess is really important to keep it moving. That's your, like, in a previous episode, we talked about a completely made up concept that it probably exists, but I gave it the name of kicks. And it's just like, okay, well, we've been like dilly-dallying in the town for like 40 minutes real time. It's time to kick the players in the pants. Like, as you're debating what to do about the heist, like, Yosaf Bridge walks in and everyone draws their guns. It's your classic, like, if the scene is stalling, two guys burst into the room with guns.
Like, fun, complicating factor, adds texture. And yeah, you can spin that up as well right at the start. Just like another randomized element that you reintroduce.
I have a loaded question for you now, because we've just talked about how we would prep a job. How many jobs are you prepping, Jords?
I would probably put together... I would do my usual, like, 3 jobs to choose from. Because the choice of job is a opportunity for there to be tension between the characters.
Absolutely. Like, we know that tension between the characters is a big thing that we want to see in the show. And I think also, if you're doing a show about how you are running away from, you know, the Alliance and whatever, because you want the freedom to do some self-determination, like, there can't just be one job to choose from.
Anyway, self-determine and follow this.
You're never going to get freedom vibes if there is actually only one choice. So yeah, I have some interesting ideas about this, but I think it's not quite as literal as a job board, but I think there's some kind of neat sort of closed loop you can get where, let me see if I can get this whole idea out of my head without absolutely messing it up. So we know that we're doing the job to get paid and we want to get paid to keep flying, right? Which means that whether it's fuel or spare parts, the ship runs on money. So the ship's range, i.e. the choice of what you can do next, the choice of what worlds you can reach, is constrained in a lot of ways by the output of your previous job.
Yes, so it's like structural integrity, yes. Fuel, yes. Or food.
Yeah. Boxes of strawberries, man.
The most pornographic non-porn scene I've ever seen.
Oh, grandpa. So I think there is a really neat setup where you as the DM look at how much fuel / parts / food / essentially money. You look at that, the range that the players have. You draw a circle around where they are now. You look at what planets are in range. You prep a job for each of them. But it's still
like that.
It's still a constrained amount of prep for you to do, because you can just make sure that they're never within range of more than like 3 or 4 planets.
Yep. I really like that. That's nice and clean.
And then if they absolutely nail the next job, it's like, okay, well, now we can maybe make a run to the core worlds to do some nice, you know, shopping, and suddenly that puts more things in range. Or if they cock up, it's like, okay, well, now we really only do have one choice of job, and it's, you know, it's got to work. But it's a fun way for you to like make that feel like it's organic, rather than you just saying like, this is the job that you have to do. I don't know how you measure the number. You don't want it to be like, oh, you have this many liters of fuel and like the compression coil is in this status. Like it's literally just like you have 5 units of go place money, but the planet that's over there is like 6 units away, right? Like
So
there's only
I think
4 planets within 5 clicks of you, you know?
You kind of go like abstract ratings for each of these that all have a cap, and the only one that matters is the smallest one at that point in time.
I mean,
So
I'm even like collapse them down to one number, and the number is basically money, and it just costs a certain amount to get certain places. I don't think you charge them money to go places, but it's like I would just abstract away all of the fuel and all of the parts and all of the food into like one number, and then that number is the radius that you draw around where they are now about how far they can reach.
I think I would keep this as those 3 axes, because I think that gives you just enough extra texture where it's like, oh yeah, you could go visit this place, but this other one has like a well-known ship junkyard.
Okay.
And maybe you'll find some extra bits in there, like when they go literally shopping for junk on Ariel, and Kaylee's just having a great time with a basket picking shit up off the ground.
Yeah, I think it adds some interesting. You're right. I think having different resources, even if they don't work any differently.
Now, importantly though, if any of these things drop to 0, the game doesn't stall. They always have something to fall back on, and that could be like, oh, you know what it is? It's the game FTL. In FTL, you do have to manage like your scrap and your fuel, and if you run out of fuel, the game doesn't end. You're just put in a really hot and spicy situation where you can scrounge a little bit.
Yeah,
so like,
I mean, look, that's a perfect.
You sit there, you put the transponder on or something like that.
Yeah, perfect opportunity for like an Alliance ship shows up and they will rescue you, but at what cost?
Yep.
Or another ship of smugglers shows up and like they will rescue you, but at what cost? And like, ooh, which one would we rather? Like, that's maybe you've got both, right? Like, who are you going to hail? Are you going to hail the passing smuggler ship, or are you going to hail the passing Alliance ship, or are you going to like, is that just a Hulk or is it filled with Reavers? Like,
I think there's interesting decision space in there.
Exactly. That like situation of having no ability to move actually becomes an interesting set of choices that you can put in front of the players and be like, are you going to trust other smugglers? Are you going to trust the Alliance? Are you going to take a chance on the Hulk and hope that it's not Reavers, you know?
And crucially, in a like campaign-based play, if we're going to be playing this for half a dozen episodes or something like that,
14, and then cancel the game.
No, we're going to release 11 of the episodes, and then the players will have 3 in the bank that can come out on the DVD later.
Ooh, and then we'll do a movie where we kill them all.
Yeah,
like a marathon all weekend session and just.
I was
going to
say,
characters.
2 years later, we will have an Airbnb and D&D session where we'll all get together, and that's it. That's what we do.
I'm not gonna lie, I'd rather do that than those campaigns that just end with a whimper. Like,
I mean, I finished my Descent into Avernus campaign with an Airbnb and D&D at this gorgeous place that's reserved for like whole bridal parties. And there were like 3 little sub-units on this really idyllic plot of farmland, and it had like a giant clawfoot bathtub. It was the best campaign ender I've ever had. It was so good. It was a great place to literally crawl out of hell from.
Yeah. Honestly,
Anywho.
like maybe a thing that we do steal from the show is like keep it super constrained and have a big finish where everyone gets a denouement.
Yeah.
Or dies. All right, so
we've got ourselves a job structure. We've got ourselves a job board structure. We've got ourselves contingencies. And the last point that I was trying to finish up there was in between episodes, we're just adjusting the dials on like how strong the ship is, how much fuel they've got, and how much food is in the tank. And that doing that at the end of a session allows us to prep the next session. So just like the show, we are rendering exactly 1 session in advance. We're not building a campaign from the start. We are rendering everything episode by episode. We're doing as little prep as possible. Yep. And that will still feel alive to them.
All right. So having just sort of constructed some elaborate systems, at least at the more preppy meta-y level, which I think, regardless of actual game system, I think you could deploy that kind of structure.
I do agree.
With that said,
as we always say, structure informs content. So if we've got that structure, it should be really easy to spin up content to populate it.
Exactly. So with that in mind, what system are you going to run this in? And why is it Blades in the Dark?
I'm so glad you asked. So it's not exactly Blades in the Dark. It's Scum and Villainy built on Forged in the Dark.
So I can put it in the show notes. There we go.
So this is one of those rare episodes where I actually did go far and wide, and I read quite a lot of stuff. I went back and read a bit of Traveller. It's been a long time since I've read any Traveller. I had a little cheeky peek at the Firefly role-playing game, which is built on Cortex. I recently bought Orbital Blues and was reading through that, and none of them felt right to me. None of them quite captured exactly the Firefly feel, and just like we said before, you can kind of reskin the same plots in this world and end up with a different experience to Firefly. You can do that in those other systems, I reckon. You could really try and force them to fit. But Scum and Villainy, which is a Forged in the Dark game, is just such a perfect, tight fit with ever so mild tweaks to what the set dressing is. Like, all of the mechanics fit so snugly, you just have to set dress a couple of elements and you've got it. So I'm solidly putting my foot in the Scum and Villainy is the RPG that I would run this session in.
Yeah, honestly, I have also read Scum and Villainy. I also read the Firefly RPG a while ago and was like a bit underwhelmed. It's very that thing that people did in the early noughties where they just, it's D&D, but we've like changed the dice, but you're still basically rolling to hit a target number and adding from a skill list, but it's like a different dice and a different skill list. But it's like
different lists.
I think the whole approach in that system is too geared towards like super lore heavy D&D players, where it's like, yeah, if I'm going to run a Firefly game, I need a Cortex listing for every single planet and what's there. I'm like, no, I want actually as little detail as possible. I don't want to be bogged down by that lore. I want to be building that with the players. That's why it's cool. That's how you capture the feeling of that season of the show, is like everything's fresh and we're not lore dumping. It's just whatever's in front of us this week. Mm-hmm. That's the lore that we're working with.
So, in a very similar vein, Scum and Villainy being like an almost direct carbon copy of Blades in the Dark with just like slightly different action rating names. The character generation is traditionally really open, where you choose like some keywords where it's like, my background is military, and I have like this heritage or whatever it is. I would go a little bit deeper. Like, normally you build out that character backstory through play, but in this case, I think you want to build it out early at the start so that you have those tight ties to other people that aren't wishy-washy.
And some ties to the world as well, I think.
Yep.
So instead of just being like ex-military, it becomes ex-alliance, right? Or ex-Blue Sun, right? Like that's suddenly something that's much more actionable in
Very
this
much
setting,
so.
and makes you feel like you're playing Firefly and not just a knockoff.
Exactly right. Like, this is an intentional choice to deviate from the original design intent of the game to make it be Firefly the game. In the same way, I would probably tweak how characters at the start choose their rival and their pal, their buddy, from like a list of pre-generated names. I might tweak that just a little bit so that there's fewer options available and potentially more crossover between the characters, so that characters might have like, I've chosen this person as my buddy and someone else has chosen him as their rival, and that just gives more affordance to intra-party conflict or tension for when you're selecting a job where that guy's involved.
And I would even go so far as to pop some like references from the show in there. Like maybe the one of the people on that list is Badger. Yep. Right? Like
100%.
Yeah, I think Scum and Villainy is a great choice. I will put in my obligatory plug for Fate, purely because the setting creation and character creation, I think, map really well onto what we chatted about. So Fate classically has you design your setting together and choose the high-level archetypes of the setting and the high-level tropes of the setting. I think that adapts really well to designing a ship together. How does our ship work? Where did it come from? You know, is it fast but unreliable? Is it slow but, you know, always gets us there? Like, what are the aspects of our ship that help us tell the story? Because we, you know, Serenity is a Firefly class, but there's a whole universe of ships out there and they all work a little bit differently. Maybe you're in something smaller and faster, or maybe you're something in something bigger and heavier, and all
your
of that changes the kinds
attributes are slightly different. Yeah,
it changes the kinds of jobs that you take on. And I think Fate gives you the right level where you just literally write it's big but slow, or it's fast but unreliable on a card, and like that's your ship descriptor. And then it also does the character connections really well. So you come in and you pick your first aspect, and then you pass your character sheet to the right, and the player on your right writes your next aspect. You come up with a little story together to define your next aspect, and then you pass it back again, and the player on your left,
straight up what we were talking about earlier.
Exactly. And so
the other players kind of define what their interaction with your
right. So these core elements, you only have technically four aspects. You have a high concept, you have a flaw basically, and then the other two of your aspects are defined as relationships to other players. So two of the big things that you'll be invoking or having compelled against you are actually the relationships with the players on either side of you, which I think is exactly what you want.
That's snug.
Again, even if I don't use the system itself, I'm stealing that for our session 0, that technique. But Fate has the nice advantage that you can then go in and mechanically interact with those relationships later. Cool. So, shall we wrap this up?
I think so. I think we've said everything that needs to be said, except. If you were to run this in 5e, how would you do it?
I don't even know.
Step 1 would be to use Spelljammer as your substrate and start looking at DM's Guild to find who made the rules workable. I'm sure there's a supplement published by a designer not Watsy who has made this work already.
Yeah. Spelljammer works, I think, as your setting. I think if you try and run something that feels like Firefly, not in that setting, maybe the closest you get is something piratesy. That's still a crew on a ship sailing from like port to port. But again, I think maybe then you're better off going for a pirates or a high sea, like either Pirates of the Caribbean or Master and Commander. I
really feel it coming out as a swashbuckler.
Yeah, it comes out different to what we get from Firefly. So yeah, I think you have to go Spelljammer. I think that the high level structures that we came up with still work. But yeah, you're just running it in D&D, and running quite like fast and loose with the D&D rules to kind of smooth over the inevitable road bumps.
I just find like the magic is just such a real sticking point for me here.
Yeah, it's like
magic doesn't translate to Firefly at all.
Just run a Firefly game and do it properly. Like
the only character who could kind of be said to play with that is River.
Yeah.
And I think I would rather just not have that be a strong element at my table.
No, I wouldn't bother. Yeah, look, if you want to run it in 5e, either like go for Spelljammer and fucking strap in and ride that space wagon to the end of the line, or just go play a pirate game, because it'll hit many of the same vibes and maybe scratch that itch, but I wouldn't call it Firefly and 5e.
I just don't think it's built to capture that vibe.
Yeah, there's too many setting assumptions that just don't hold built into the mechanics, you know? It's not a good fit, unfortunately. Or maybe fortunately, maybe this is your chance to try something new. If you have a group of nerds at a table who love Firefly and who doesn't, maybe this is your gateway drug to be like, we can't do it in 5e, but like we could try this really fun new game.
Would you run this?
Oh, absolutely.
It's such a non-question. There's no choice space in this.
No.
The dial is circular. And the whole rim is yes.
It's so perfect. It's such a good fit for the genre. And also, like, as I said, everyone at the table wants to do it because they all love the show.
Absolutely no one doesn't like Firefly.
It's such an easy sell. Such an easy sell and such a good gateway drug to try and, you know, maybe get your players to try something that isn't 5e. And maybe that's our segue into wrapping up.
That's it.
Yeah, this has been Playtonics, an RPG design show where we design sessions and not games. And this week we have designed a Firefly for you to deliver at your table.
One Firefly.
One Firefly for you to deliver at your table to your unsuspecting crew. If you enjoyed this show, please fang us a review on the place where you got it. Send it to your friends, especially your Game Master friends. And if you are a Game Master, send it to another Game Master and ask them what they thought. You can find this episode and all the other episodes at playtonics.net. That's playtonics.net. And you can get the episodes wherever you get your podcasts. I think that's everything. I think I said all the bits. Did I say all the bits?
I think you said all the bits. Can't wait to see you guys next month for whatever we record.
Yeah, tight. Shiny.
Shiny.
Shiny.